Hi everyone, my name is Anil Kumar M. I am Assistant Professor come Research Fellow at MS Ramaiah Institute of Management. Today we are here to discuss about a very interesting article written by Dr. Raghuram Rajan, who was a former governor of Reserve Bank of India. So the article title was Populist Policies, Populist Policies Advantage. So he had written this article in the Project Syndicate, and it's a very interesting article which goes back to the subprime crisis and behind it the liberal economic policy of the West and how it led to subprime crisis, and it traces to the current economic policies which is being followed across the world. And so it's an interesting article, and it's in the present context, it becomes very relevant as India is also going through certain economic reforms to understand to understand the way forward for Indian economy overall. For this, we have Professor Kiran Bindu. He's an assistant professor of finance at MS Ramaiah Institute of Management. He holds MCOM and is a cost accountant. His prior corporate engagement include Indus League Clothing Limited, MCS Software Solutions Limited, India Life Pension Funds, System Domain Private Limited, and Stockbite. He was the finance area mentor at Chiron Global Accelerator between 2013 to 2016. During the same period, he also offered finance area consulting to high-tech companies incubated by Target Accelerator. Kiran has over 21 years of experience in academics, both in India and France. His current research interest is AI enhancement of robo-advisory in India. He keenly follows global financial markets and speaks at seminars and conferences to spread awareness on personal finance planning. Kiran teaches in our PGPFA course. Dr. Kiran Bindu, we kindly welcome to this discussion.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Yes, as you mentioned, it is a very relevant topic for the times that we live in and the policies that the government is pursuing. I'll be happy to kind of share my initial thoughts. We need to go back to 1991 and the time that we lived in 1991, wherein India had about a week's or a month's worth of foreign currency for its imports. And it was that point of time that India decided to liberalize the economy, welcome foreign capital, reduce trade restrictions, go in for globalization, allow foreign investments in various sectors of our economy, devalue the currency. And consequently, we saw a reasonably good growth wherein millions of people were alleviated out of poverty over the period of time. 2011 was a period of a little bit of a scare for India. Mm-hmm. Wherein the growth rates had dropped. And in 2008, subprime mortgage, when the entire world was affected, India was a relatively stable pocket in the global economy because Indian banks were not as exposed to the subprime mortgages as their American counterparts, and their leverages was not as high as the other banks in Ireland, who were extremely levered up to play the subprime mortgage crisis. So the thought process that permeated over the last 30 years was the government should stay out of business. The government has no business to be in business. In fact, there was a viewpoint that Raja banega vyapari to praja banegi bhikari. And the government was encouraged to exit as many things as possible. That's why you saw a lot of whole-scale sale of PSUs. And recently being in point, Air India was sold and privatized. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of hostile opposition to privatization, but over the last 30 years, we broadly followed a policy wherein smaller government is a better government. A government can give you everything, can also take away everything from you. This was the mindset that was very visible for the last 30 years. The animal spirits were unleashed. Capitalism was considered to be good. And indeed, capitalism, if you see, has offered the best standard of living for most of the people in the West. When stock markets go up, it helps the pension funds. The pension funds are able to support the elderly. It also supports the insurance companies that have invested their float in stock markets, and that helps the economy to flourish. And then came the reversal in policies with basically Trump getting elected and nearshorism becoming a new mantra. And once again, the protectionist policies began to regurgitate in the corridors of power. So this article is all about that. It examines how when policymakers lose the public trust, the old policies that were out of favor tend to make a comeback.
For a layman, like you give a very good historical background for this article, and for a layman, we understand liberalism in a different context. So, can you explain in layman terms, like what do you mean by orthodox liberal economic policy? We come across this sentence more often in this article. So, what is it?
So this is propounded by Adam Smith, wherein the individual and individual's freedom is promoted. The government does not interfere in the market. Laissez-faire policy is followed, which means to say the government is not going to be fixing pricing control, production controls, raw material supply controls, no control of any kind. The people are at a liberty to enter into contracts. The people are at a liberty to fix the prices themselves, and may the best man win. So the invisible hand that guides all of our self-interest is going to ensure that the society as a whole prospers. This is the core philosophy of liberal orthodoxy, wherein there is not going to be too much stifling regulation. The government is not going to come and tell me when I printed an invoice, I have to tell some government agency that I printed an invoice. The government is not going to come and tell me that if I load my goods on a transporter, I need to tell some government agency that I have loaded my goods on the so-and-so transporter's truck, and the so-and-so transporter has got only so many days to ensure that the goods reaches its destination. These are all stifling regulation.
Okay. Isn't it great, like if there is no government interference? But why did it fall out of favor in the West, especially? So
all right, it fell out of favor because the argument was propounded. See, there is always going to be a situation wherein 80% are struggling and 20% are prospering. It has always been like that. It is always going to be like that. So now the ruling dispensation of any country would need the support of the 80% and not really the 20%, which is why regulation promoting the interest of the 80% tends to garner popular support. And that's why it is populist. Explaining away the misfortunes, giving a very reasonably understandable explanation so that everybody can follow. Flat rate of tax is a typical example of a populist measure. If people don't have homes, government will construct homes. This experiment has been done time and again, and it has failed in many countries, wherein the government itself gets into the business of building houses. It tends to be a disaster from the get-go. Mexico tried it, it did not work. It doesn't work. So it only distorts the market.
Okay, so I was just going through the article, and it mentions about loss of public trust in liberal economic policies. So I just started to wonder in terms of Indian context, actually. So to the common man here, like, do they really think of this liberal ideologies, how it is being impacted for economic policies? So what is it for the common man here?
No, I think the common man is extremely articulate and intelligent also when it comes to his self-interest and preservation. If you will notice, India is very resilient. Indians very quickly adapted to demonetization. Any other country, they would have really struggled. Yes. So it is not a good idea to bet against India and the ingenuity of Indians. So they understand that nothing comes free. And if something comes free, they will have to pay for it either in the short run or in the long run.
Yeah, you use a very important word resilience. So when you go back to the 2008 subprime crisis time and how it was impacting the West and all, so the impact was not, there was a negative impact on Indian financial system, of course, but it was not in the similar way what the West was exposed to. So there was a basic opinion among the specialists that Indian banking systems were resilient. So somehow they were able to withstand it. So can you explain us what is the resilience of Indian banking system so that our audience understand why the banking system is functioning or why it is not collapsing, somewhat similar to like the Western side?
All
Yeah.
right. The resilience which we talk about the banking system comes from adequacy of capital that you have built up over the good years to sustain you through the bad years. When I say bad years, I mean the years when your defaults of the borrowers are skyrocketing and you need to recognize that as a loss. So in the good years, if you have built up reserves, in the bad years, you can take the hit. Your equity capital is the muscle to withstand the loss. That's the only capital you can afford to lose. In the West, as recently as just last year, we saw the forced marriage between UBS and Credit Suisse. And in that, when the Swiss government got involved, they wrote down the entire Tier 1 capital of Credit Suisse. It's called as additional Tier 1 bonds. It caused a lot of heartburn. And somewhere in the fine print, when those bonds were sold, it was written that should a government intervention be necessary to bail out Credit Suisse, the entire additional Tier 1 bonds can be wiped out. This causes a lot of heartburn and mistrust in the system. So Indian banks also have had their fair share of problems with the mounting NPAs, and continuous recapitalization of these banks have helped them to stay afloat. You will notice that many banks got merged. It's because on their own, those banks would otherwise have been a gone entity, not a going entity. That's why they had to be merged. And that's why we have seen so far the banking system is doing reasonably well. And they have managed to recoup substantial amount of money that they had to write off.
Okay.
Because of asset reconstruction companies being in play.
Okay.
That's why our banking system is reasonably okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I was also just wondering, like, since the liberalization time in India in 1991, prior to that it was like a license Raj what we had, right? So since the subprime crisis and all the economic crisis what we see across the globe, like is it making the governments, especially in the emerging markets, to go back to that, to refollow that path, the license Raj thing coming back? So are we going in that direction currently?
It looks that way. It looks that we are trying to tread that same path of protectionist, we will do everything in-house kind of policy. What that does is, if I erect an entry barrier and say nobody can import steel, and steel should only be made in India, what that does is the steel manufacturers now know that they are protected and the Indian market is for them. They can produce any quality of steel and all of us will have no choice but to buy it from them only. They can produce great quality steel. They can produce substandard quality steel. Right. And sell it to you at a premium. What that does is that reduce the competitiveness of all other industries.
Yes.
So this is the choice that you need to make. Whether are you going to protect one industry and hurt another industry? Hurt you will.
Yeah.
But you need to be aware of that and conscious about making that decision. Fine, I know this is the policy and this is the policy. Fine. Then okay.
Yeah. So so in the present context, like there's a more emphasis from the government side to promote the domestic manufacturing units, right? So they are bringing various rules and regulations to it. So what are the potential trade-off for this? So we know that there is a lot of things regarding importing the laptops and all, right? So what are the trade-off we are expecting?
The trade-off on a scale of 0 to 10 can be 0 and can also be 10. It depends on how the manufacturers view this government policy.
Mhm.
If it is viewed that doesn't matter what the government protection is, I'm going to follow global best practices and put out the best quality product I can. If that is the mindset, then the impact is going to be 0. There won't be any trade-off. We are going to get the best quality steel at a reasonably good world-class rate, and it will not hurt other industries.
Mhm.
But if on the other hand, people view government's protectionist policy as a license to put out substandard quality goods, then the potential trade-off could be on a scale of 10.
Okay. Okay.
So it's on individual manufacturers to take a call.
So,
But when
so
you say that I'm going to permit licensing of laptops, then the first person who's going to get affected is the IT sector, which is what is the point that is made in the article also.
right, right. So India is like bringing back all those protectionist measures, which was like prior to 1991,
I
right?
spoke
Some of
I
it
spoke recently. I spoke recently to electronics components player, and he said that major manufacturers have been allowed to bring in from abroad still. So the government has recognized that this has its dangers, and they have allowed the major players, the Dell, the HP, and all of these people who have set up manufacturing in India to import whatever they need for their components from abroad. But then the government is also restricting import of laptops. So it is a kind of a 50-50 situation out there. But the general consensus among electronic goods players is that it is going to increase the cost of laptops.
Yeah. So I just want to come back to at the broader level question now. So we know that Trump came. The slogan was "Make America Great Again," and here the government is like promoting more of domestic manufacturing and all the Atmanirbhar Bharat policies, all these things. So my larger question is that how is it going to impact the process of globalization? Is it stalling or like how are we moving ahead?
If you remember, 1970, George Fernandez had this transfer of technology policy. He told Coca-Cola that you must transfer the formula to Indians. And Coca-Cola said, thank you very much, no thanks. And they went away. This new policy has all the makings of the same George Fernandez policy of Janata government, if you will notice. All right. So we all know how that policy played out. And we arrived at 1991.
Yeah.
So when Trump came, Trump had a very specific ask from the Indian government. He said, you have levied too much of taxes on our Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And consequently, they are not able to sell. That problem did not go anywhere. Harley-Davidson left India, and now they're back into India with Hero Motors. When WTO was formed, it was formed with a very specific purpose that we are not going to erect trade barriers and make imports costly.
Yeah.
But once again, now we seem to be erecting trade barriers. It hurts the competitive nature of the Indian industry when you do that.
So we are seeing two extreme positions here, right? In the discussion, one is we have a protectionist measures of prior 1991, what we had the license Raj, or what you explained clearly, and we also have an extreme thing of liberalism, which gave rise to the subprime crisis, right? There are two extreme things. As a policy makers, like what should be the middle path they need to choose? Like they just need to go with the flow. So is there a middle path for the policy makers instead of choosing this extreme paths?
Okay. Regulation
Mhm.
is a very fine art, and the person who is a regulator can't afford to hold the bird too tightly because you may stifle the bird. You can't hold the bird too loosely because then the bird will fly away.
Mhm.
Light touch regulation is an experiment that Gordon Brown, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer of UK, tried,
Mhm.
wherein he promised banks, move to London and you will have very light touch regulation. We will not ask you to hold excess capital if you're holding risky assets. We trust you know how to manage your affairs.
Mhm.
So it is a tug of war between industry and the government. Industry wants light regulation. The government wants to ensure that they have their foot on the pedal so that all sections of the society gets advantage of their policies. Because the government has to ensure that they deliver on their socio-economic policies. Otherwise, they're going to lose power.
Yeah.
So from the get-go, both the sides have got opposing interest. And there is going to be a tug of war. You can't have a situation where you say that I'm just not going to regulate. If you did that, then you will have a subprime mortgage crisis every 10 years once, and the bailout has to come from the taxpayers' funds.
Right.
If you are going to over-regulate, then nobody is going to come and be able to do business with you. Regulation must be adequate to promote financial stability and ensure that there is some sort of a control over inflation and your currency does not get devalued.
Okay. What is required is an adequate regulation, not too much of it, right? So what has been a major learnings for India from the subprime crisis, especially emerging markets? Like, how are they adapting to it?
Well, if you see what I've put on the board here, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. I've borrowed it from the article. Tough questions don't have simple answers. And the policymakers, their job is not one of cookie cutter, that something worked somewhere else. I'm going to do that copy paste in India straight away, and it is going to work in India also. The article also makes a very nice important point. It says that difference between a good economist and a bad economist is that not being able to just see the first order effects of your policy, but also to be able to see the second order and the third order effects of the policies that you make.
Right.
So we may increase the wages. That is going to make the bottommost rung of your population very happy. But then you're going to contend with skyrocketing inflation very soon. And it is astounding how in the COVID pandemic, even advanced countries printed money and put money in the hands of their people, knowing fully well that the hangover of cheap money is going to be very difficult to get rid of. And the entire 2022, they have spent with skyrocketing inflation. And now the situation in places like Canada, etc., is so bad that the wages have not kept up with the asset price increase that has taken place because of inflation.
Right. As you mentioned, like there was a word called as complex over there. So economic management of a country, any country, it's very complex in nature. And I thank you very much for being part of this discussion. And you have clearly gave us the historical understanding of the whole issue and giving some clarity on it and where do we stay currently. So thank you very much, Dr. Kiran Bindu.
Thank you. You're most
Thanks.
welcome. Bye-bye.